Welcome to Alternative States. I'm Bill Strickler,
I'm Quinte Giuffre.
and we're going to talk with Quinte about her internet investigations, especially since so much stuff has been going on since our last show, and you can bring us up to date. So we're going to be talking today about the follow-up on Lieber, the Harvard professor that got into trouble, and talk about the 21 vials. And then we're going to look at the drug conflict situation going on some drugs that are supposed to be working, but then again, certain people don't want it coming out. And then we're going to finish up in a Canadian couple that mysteriously died,
Yes.
that was involved with the drugs. And then we're going to talk about what's going on the internet with Bill Gates.
A lot.
So let's go ahead and just get started here a little bit. Give us a little taste of what you're finding about Professor Lieber.
A lot's coming out on this Charles M. Lieber from Harvard, the chemistry and biological chemistry chair, for over 8 years working hand in hand with the Chinese. He never ever has spoken about his family. What's being released in the news recently in the last couple days is about his father, Robert L. Lieber.
Well, sometimes you don't talk about your family because you want to keep them out of the spotlight, or maybe he had problems with his father because he married somebody else. You just never know. So
True.
our intent of doing this show is to say, hey, maybe there is some truth out there on the internet, and maybe things are just taking things the wrong way. But as I've said on several occasions, that I'm an engineer, I want to know the facts. So let's have you bring to light facts that you're finding, or as much as you can tell.
Well, I think you'll be really interested in this as being an engineer because his father had quite the engineering background. He actually was heavily involved in Harvard carbon nanobio weaponry and also top secret projects. And he worked with Serco on some sort of RCA spying capabilities, or
In the 60 years, RCA, you had Raytheon, names that you really don't hear anymore, that were involved with, and Martin Marietta, these companies that had government contracts that were bought up by other companies. But, back in the 50s and 60s, you're talking about Russia and the Cold War. So, not everything that we hear about the Harvard professor's father is necessarily in a negative way.
Right.
It's just that we just don't talk about it because some of this stuff was top secret.
right. Well, I think what's coming out is that Lockheed Martin is controlled by something called the Queen's Golden Share. RCA and Serco and QNetQ now manages much of the Americans' large-scale infrastructure.
Well, it's like the big fish eat the little fish. And who knows who's in charge of things anymore. I mean, you could have a major corporation and they're actually controlled by somebody else. But let's hold that thought for a second. We'll be right back with more on the Harvard professor. I'm back with Quinte. So we talked about the professor and his father, but do we have any idea what was in the 21 vials that was involved with the Harvard professor back at the beginning of the year? Is there anything that you're seeing out on the internet that addresses the 21 vials?
The only thing I've seen is that there have been indications that Chinese nationals have tried to bring vials into this country since then, but were stopped. And nobody is reporting. There is no information on what is in the vials, either way.
So there's nothing that's been leaked, which is kind of strange since everything leaks. That there's nothing has come out about the 21 vials. Where I personally believe that if we find out what's in those 21 vials, that could give us a real indicator of how the whole virus situation occurred.
I would agree. The new information I have on Professor Lieber is, indicted Harvard carbon nanotube biowarfare, likely constructed the coronavirus nanotubes 5G delivery system. Professor Lieber has hidden from the public disclosure that his father, he ran a satellite tracking company and a radar spy company for RCA. There's a lot of people involved in this, like Lockheed, Serco. The British are involved in this. So they're suggesting that it's a possible weaponized 5G wireless nanotube coronavirus delivery system.
So tell us what nanobiology really is.
Well, Professor Lieber has two companies, and you can find them on the internet. One of the companies is called Nanosys, and if you look at it, they develop what's called a quantum dot. Now, when you look into that a little bit deeper, and you kind of go into YouTube and kind of Google around on that, you'll find that they're using them to treat cancer. They actually go in the body, and it's like having a robot in your body altering things. So that's the first company. The second company does not look very developed, and it simply says Vista Therapeutics, and it could indicate somewhat of a clinical monitoring system. But again, that's just a guess. That's just a suggestion.
So nanotechnology isn't necessarily a bad thing, that it could be used for good, like most things. Either you can use it in a good way or a bad
Right.
way. So just to bring up a point, that his father dealt with certain frequencies and certain electronics, and this definitely seems to be, a follow-through with his dad, with his skills, that he's also developing some things on an engineering level, which is also chemical and biological, because you have to engineer this nano cell
Right.
to make it work.
You have to program it somehow.
And what is it being used for now?
A lot of times it's being used in a lot of cancer centers to cut out tumors or to somewhat like deliver toxic drugs to specific locations. And the information suggests that it's very effective that way. Now they say they leave it in the body in case they need it later, and there's no real information on that beyond that.
So once it gets in the body, do you know of any way to get it back out, or it's just there and maybe dormant?
Right.
Unless it's keyed again to activate in some way. But if you're talking nanotechnology, you probably have, what did you say? It's larger, it's smaller than a virus and larger
Than a drop of water.
So it's smaller than a cell of a virus, is
Yep.
that correct?
Right.
Well, that's pretty amazing, and hopefully, we can come up with some video or something to show our viewers that, this new technology. My question to you earlier was, where are they manufacturing it?
It looks like California, but there's some indication of Korea on there, or South Korea. I'm not sure. My other concern is, what would a monitoring company need to do in conjunction with Obamacare?
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this when we come back in a second. I'm back with Quinte. So let's talk about what's going on with the drugs. You hear Donald Trump say things about a certain drug that looks promising, and what do you have to lose? And I kind of agree with him. If somebody's in a hospital and there's no other solution, why not? Why not try something that has shown positive results in other countries or in the United States? Why not?
Well, I can think of only one reason why people would be so dead set against this. If this was some sort of nanotechnology encapsulated situation that they wanted to use or activate later down the road for nefarious purposes, they wouldn't want you to kill it off.
Well, that's your opinion, of course.
Oh,
right?
yeah, it's
So
my opinion.
what are you finding on the internet? Do you see a lot of people voicing their opinion one way or another? Why not? Let's do it. or it's not safe, it hasn't proven to be safe? I mean, what are you seeing out there?
I think that what we're seeing is this drug has been around over 80 years. It's been approved by our FDA since 1955. And with my particular background, I used to work with all the large pharmaceutical companies, and I used to help them with logistics and getting their vaccines properly shipped quickly because they were on ice. What I'm seeing is those drugs usually have a 7-year run on them, and then they go generic, and then they go over the counter if they're safe enough. This drug appears to be fairly safe, fairly safe. I don't understand why we can't use it or request it.
So you really haven't seen anything detrimental on the internet?
No.
That we shouldn't use it for reasons A, B, and C?
It's been safely tested on pregnant women with the malaria for over 30 years. And I believe the combination antibiotic is used for children.
Didn't you say something about over-the-counter?
Yeah, well, I mean, typically, I mean, when you look at these drugs, like all of the allergy drugs, they all went over the counter fairly quickly after their generics came up. And then also, if you look at anything gastro, Tylenol, Advil, Aleve, they all have side effects. You can actually die from Tylenol, but if you take too much. But the hydrochloroquine's been around a long time. I have questions on why we aren't getting it over the counter.
Well, we discussed earlier about a strange case that happened in Canada. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So you had a husband and wife that were strangely, or it was determined that they were murdered, or it was a suicide. Which was it?
It's been determined to be murder now. The Shermans were, originally they said it was a suicide pact, but this was a very wealthy wealthy couple, and they were strung up over their pool, their indoor pool, with a wire. They say that's a kind of a CIA tactic. They also owned the rights to the generic hydrochloroquine. Yes.
Well, you know, that just seems a little strange.
Yes. 3 years ago, too.
So this could have been, so they were taken out, and now let's just make it clear that no one's contending that the CIA had anything to do with this. It was like, it seemed like a CIA type or intelligence from whichever country
Right.
could have been involved with this.
Yes.
So here's somebody that, husband and wife, that owned the rights to the generic version 3 years ago, and here they're taken out. It seems kind of strange. I mean, suicide when you got billions of dollars and you're living in La La Land just doesn't seem like a reason to be checking yourself out.
No, they had no prior problems with their marriage. They were an elderly couple. They were very wealthy, nice family, and living in Canada, and then just suddenly both strung up.
Well, when we come back, let's talk about a familiar name that most of us know, and you've seen a lot of static on the internet about him, and that's Bill Gates. So be watching us in just a minute. Welcome back to Alternative States, where we're talking about what we're finding on the internet. Quinte is doing daily and nightly investigations and trying to figure out what the real truth is. And sometimes you find out more truth on the internet than you do listening to people talk on television or the mainstream media, which I have my doubts sometimes that they're actually telling you the real truth.
Right.
Because they're controlled to some degree by their sponsors, where we're just telling it the way that it is, and you're doing this for the people, right?
Which is interesting because their sponsors are the people that we're reporting on regarding the virus. It's an interesting combination how pharmacy and media go together.
Well, one thing that I find kind of strange, because Bill Gates and I pretty much grew up at the same time, is that he's so involved. He and his wife are so involved with health issues. and population around the world. So let's see what you found about Bill Gates, and to let everybody know that we don't necessarily believe or say that any of these reportings are truthful. We're just letting you know where we're getting the reports, so you can look them up yourself.
Yes, they'll be at the bottom, posted at the bottom. This one's directly from CNN, so you would think they would tell us something that's truthful, maybe. This is about a letter that was written from Bill Gates to Xi Jinping, and how he deeply appreciated the generosity of the Bill and Melinda Gates. Now, the interesting thing is that this was written, or this article was written on February 22nd, 2020. And Bill Gates donated $100 million to emergency funding in China, to bolster China in research and development of drugs, vaccines, etc.
So it would seem that he would do that, invest in our country first before going over to China. It just seems to me like if we got a virus coming, or I'm not sure at the date that it first showed up in that assisted living location up in Washington State, that we should be concentrating on developing something here that would benefit all of us. Because if something goes over to China, we don't know if we're going to get any results out of it. But go ahead.
Or how much we're going to pay for it coming back. But our money was definitely going over to China. Our data from this professor was going over to China. A lot of things were going to China. And we don't really know what they were. Michael Bloomberg was quoted saying Xi Jinping was not a dictator. Most of the media is jumping to Xi Jinping's defense. And then we're seeing that not only Michael Bloomberg, but Harvard professor Lieber was arrested dealing directly with Chinese militants for over 8 years.
And he was collecting a check every month, and he had a lab in Wuhan where the virus supposedly started.
And I have confirmed, according to reports, it is a biowarfare lab that he was running over there. Is there any money going in from other people, other elites in our society? I don't know. But it's very odd to see all of these other characters jumping into the defense of China and this lab, and then this professor running it.
Well, you know, as cynical as I am, I would like, first thing that jumps in my head is, what motivation do they have? Why would they want to create a virus that affects every country, and mostly men? It's being shown that mostly men are getting this, suffering from this virus.
Well, they're absolutely, and shutting down the entire country for it, entire world for it, and their models are failing right now. That's just breaking news. Their models are failing. The CDC and FDA, their models are failing. They said there were going to be 2.2 million dead, and now their models are showing less than 100,000 dead.
Is that around the world or the United States?
It's around the world, and that is within the last 8 days. So all of their models are off. And they're trying to push us towards vaccines, and they're not allowing us a generic brand of a drug that costs about $5 a dose.
Yeah, there's got to be some reason. Most of this stuff is money oriented anyway. So who would benefit from having a vaccine?
Well, I can tell you one group that it's the 1,000 Talents Plan, and this is where the Chinese get to come into the United States, and it's not just Harvard. Unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, but the Chinese authorities have expanded the program to Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, University of Tokyo, and others. So there's some pretty high-level scientists in those universities, and this 1,000 Talents Plan has been expanded to all of these universities.
So what's going on with the, you seeing anything new going with the WHO?
Yeah, there's again just a lot of conflicts between the WHO, and I think this weekend the UN just accepted China as a human rights advocate in the UN.
Yeah, but they were really killing Muslims, right? I mean, we're making life, well, let me say, making life very difficult for them in China. So I know that there's religious persecution because China, they're communists and they don't want religion.
No, they have proven, I guess, a concentration-like camps in China that have been picked up on satellite with the Uyghur Muslims and also the Falun Gong, which they have reportedly used in the organ trade. So it's very odd that the UN at this time, with this crisis going on, and their models are not matching up, their numbers are failing, that they would suddenly accept a country as large as China and as powerful as China as a human rights advocate.
Well, we only have less than a minute, so what would you like to say in closing?
I think we have a lot more to find out about Bill Gates and many of these other players and their connections to China.
And you're finding a lot of people on the internet are actually helping you, or they're coming up with good information. Of course, there's going to be some good and some bad.
Right.
But when you filter it out, you are seeing some things that do show some credibility in them, right?
I think we're finding exact quotes, recordings, TED Talks of Bill Gates speaking and saying conflicting things to what's actually occurring.
Well, if people go on to the Department of Justice site or these other ones, they can actually do the research the way that you do it. And that's what we profess here is we'll give you, Quinte will give you certain ideas and then look it up yourself.
Absolutely.
I'm Bill Strickler. This is Alternative States with Quinte. Until next time.